Hello, everyone. I am Henri Makembe, and welcome to Do Big Talks, where we discuss the latest trends in digital advocacy. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the intersection of digital and traditional organizing with Mira Weinstein. I am very excited to have Mira on today. With 30 years of experience, Mira knows political and traditional organizing inside out. She is currently the founder and organizing in chief of Organize to Win. Welcome, Mira. Why don't we start by you telling a little bit about yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to have this conversation. The first time I knocked on a door was 1988, when I might have been the only person in America who thought that Michael Dukakis could win the presidential race. So, spoiler alert, for folks who didn't know about it, he could not.
Thank you.
He could not win. So since then, I've really kind of expanded my definition of campaigns. I've expanded my definition of victory, and I've really leaned in to deeper organizing campaigns. And so, I started Organizing to Win with a thought that organizing is bringing people together to build power. So, sometimes that looks like designing a campaign for a social justice organization that brings people together using the opportunity of an election or the opportunity of a legislative fight, for example. Sometimes that looks like training. It looks like customized training for members or staff or volunteers. And sometimes it looks like helping a progressive candidate win office.
Fair enough. That I couldn't agree more that customization and organizing looks different, and no matter what the opportunity. And that goes into my next question is, you've been doing this for a while, as you just mentioned, and what do you see has been some integral changes over the past decade, really high, especially with bridging the gap between digital and traditional organizing?
I started in field. So for me, everything starts at field and flows from there. And so the changes in field technology in even the last 5 years are just revolutionary. I would say that mobile apps revolutionized field campaigns. Back in the day, to run a canvas involved a lot of paper, a lot of printing, and if you were lucky, a barcode scanner that worked. And believe me, they didn't always work. It was very frustrating. So now it's a little more, in some ways, a little more democratic because more people can do targeting. The way we design and cut turf for canvassing is so much better and different. It's a better experience for the canvas director. It's better for the field director, for the campaign manager, because the data is more manageable. And it's much better for the canvasser or for a volunteer. Even folks who are a little phobic about technology really learn to love it. So it's a simple thing that we now take for granted. But, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, it was revolutionary, and it has changed field campaigns. Kind of like, I also think that peer-to-peer texting has really, has been a little bit of a game changer. I mean, I did a campaign last year, which we won because of peer-to-peer texting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on the SMS and the texting. I think we've seen some very good ROI and some very good moving of the needle when it came to texting and SMS campaigns, especially peer texting. So I couldn't agree more on that.
I think we're going to have to think ahead a little bit and figure out like what's the next thing, right? Because we've moved primarily from phone banking because people don't answer their phone anymore, and it was a great tool, but then people stop answering their phone. So now when we move into texting, how are we gonna adapt and innovate when people stop replying to their texts?
It's funny that you mentioned phone. I still have a landline, and I'm not sure if I should admit this in this type of program, but I like getting the calls from campaigns because I feel like as a DC resident, it's one of the few times where we get pulled.
Yep.
So looking at that, and obviously thinking about what's next and digital, why do you think digital, when it comes to organizing, is so important right now?
Well, I think about organizing. The definition of organizing is bringing people together to build power. So in organizing, we think there's this concept that we think about called creating the environment. And creating the environment is creating an environment around a person, a voter, an activist, a volunteer, so that that person takes action, that there's an environment around them where taking whatever action they want to take is comfortable, is kind of okay for them. And I think that social media in particular is really important in creating that environment. I think it's harder to develop authentic relationships over digital platforms or through social media. I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's harder. You know, before 2018, I would have said a campaign could not build a crowd through over social media. And I was wrong, right? So 2018 proved me wrong. So I don't think it's impossible to build authentic relationships over digital platforms. I just think it's harder. And that's the key. If what we're talking about is building power versus winning an election, winning a piece of legislation, or killing a piece of legislation. If what we're talking about is this kind of broader, more nebulous concept of building power, power is about relationships and the relationships we have with each other. So there's an important role for all kinds of digital tools and platforms in building that power. We just have to figure out how to use those tools to build relationships.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more in terms of like using the digital tool to build power. I think where we've seen it very effective is when you have a field organizer that then, create maybe a private Facebook group or something where the people that they've talked to then get to interact. In a couple of organizations, we've seen after an offline event, then creating kind of like an online meeting place where folks are then engaged because they know each other from that world. So really just being able to bridge that gap in terms of like meeting in person, which we haven't been able to over the past 18 months, but meeting in person and then bringing that relationship online to almost sustain it and then driving it back offline to take action on the ground. So I think having organizers being basically inhabiting both worlds has been the most effective that we've seen, especially when working with labor organizations. So I couldn't agree more with you. With that in mind, how do you then think is the best setup to take advantage of both traditional and digital organizing to build that power and to build lasting power?
Well, I think there's a lot of really interesting, fun things going on. The folks at Community Change are doing really exciting and fun things with deeper outreach to social media followers, right? And I've always thought that that's one of the ways that you could do it, where if somebody engages with your organization or your brand on social media, that person's a potential leader. And to develop that relationship and build that leadership requires or provides an opportunity for some one-on-one communication, right? So reaching out through that platform, DMing them, getting to know them, building that relationship so that that person, if it's appropriate and if it's in their comfort, in or out of their comfort zone, can take on more of a leadership role, can become more of an organizer and take deeper action in addition to their social media activity. So I think that's one way. I think that there's a lot of great tools out there to, I don't want to say digitize because I think that scares a lot of people, but to make more systematic relational organizing, which is funny to me because, as an organizer, that's organizing. That's what we've done. Like, that's the heart of it. And there's a whole bunch of tools out there that make the relational organizing very systematic. I know John Ossoff's campaign did a really amazing job in kind of formalizing the relational organizing steps.
Yeah, I think bringing relational organizing to scale, I think is something that digital tools allow us to do well, and exactly deepening that engagement with our audience and with our leaders, potential leaders, is definitely something I think digital tools can help with. To wrap up, you've mentioned that we need to think about what's next. From your perspective, what is next on this front?
I think what's next is I think you alluded to it a few minutes ago. What's next is thinking about how do we use the technology available to build authentic relationships, right? And again, I'm biased. I think about organizing, I think about field, and to a lesser degree, I think about mobilization. And if what we want to do is build power, we have to build authentic relationships and strong relationships and trust. And so we got to think about, how does this technology, which it often is one way, how do we make it two-way so that we are building trust and people feel connections and they feel their own power to take action?
I couldn't agree with you more there. I think building authentic relationship and that builds trust is the thing at the heart of what we here at Do Big Things want to focus on using digital tools. So yeah, I think that is right up our alley, and I couldn't agree with you more. Is with the provisions of tools and digital, I think we have to also think about, okay, how do we make sure that the folks that we're talking to, we're building authentic relationship when we're asking them to take action. So yeah, that is the $1,000,000 question or more. And with that said, Mira, absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for the rest of us for joining us for another episode of Do Big Talks. If you have any topics you'd like us to discuss, please feel free to reach us at info@dobigthings.com, and stay tuned for future episodes. Have a good one, everybody.